right, this is James Carey's work, The Ritual and the Transmission Models of Communication. And it's from his book, Communication as Culture, Essays on Media and Society. What is the commonest view of communication in our culture? Well, Carey asserts it's what he calls the transmission view, or the transmission model. And he says this. He says the transmission view of communication is the commonest in our culture, perhaps in all industrial cultures, and dominates contemporary dictionary definitions under the term. What is a ritual definition of communication? This is what Carey says. He says, in a ritual definition, communication is linked to terms such as sharing, participation, association, fellowship, and the possession of a common faith. What are some of the common roots that the ritual definition exploits? The ritual definition exploits the ancient identity and common roots of the terms commonness, communion, community, and communication. And so that C-O-M-M there, that com, that means with, and it has to do with spending time with other people. A ritual view of communication is directed not toward the extension of messages in space, but toward the maintenance of society and time. Not the act of imparting information, but the representation of shared beliefs. And so, here's the rub. The transmission model of communication is the most common, basic model in society, and it has to do with transmitting a message by a sender over a medium to a receiver. And so it's a geographic metaphor, right? Think of like the U.S. Post, where you send a letter across the country, right? The information is transmitted, it moves across space. Now he is distinguishing this transmission model, which everybody understands, with another model of communication, and he calls it the ritual model. Now this ritual model is really about being together. It's about rituals of kind of shared ceremony, right? So things like weddings or graduations or initiations, which bring people out together. Those are ritualistic. I think like high school football games can be very ritualistic because the town and all these other people, they come out and they spend time together. And in a sense, it's the kind of information doesn't really matter because, it doesn't matter who wins or loses in that sense. It's just this ritual togetherness of enjoying each other's company and spending the time together. What are the archetypal or highest exemplar cases of both the transmission and the ritual models? Well, Carey asserts if the archetypal, or like that highest form, right, that paragon case of communication under a transmission view is the extension of messages across geography for the purpose of control. The archetypal case under a ritual view is the sacred ceremony that draws persons together in fellowship and commonality. And so clear, the most obvious example would be like church, right? But it's not just church. It's whenever people come together. You could think of like Thanksgiving dinner or your birthday party or something like that, or even like Friday happy hour if it's a regular recurring thing. It becomes like a ritual, right? Family dinner, if it occurs enough, becomes rather ritualistic. Is the ritual model like a sermon? Well, he's going to say no. The answer is no, right? I think students often miss this. So if you actually watch this video, I think you've got the better hand. The indebtedness to the ritual view of communication of religion is apparent in the name chosen to label it. Moreover, it derives from a view of religion that downplays the role of the sermon, right? Because think of sermon as one too many. The instruction and admonition. Admonition means like when the preacher gets up there and criticizes and says, do this or you're gonna, sin leads to bad things. That's an admonition. And he says this, he said, so moreover, it derives from a view of religion that downplays the role of the sermon, the instruction, and admonition in order to highlight the role of the prayer, the chant, and the ceremony. See, these things, the prayer, the chant, and the ceremony, are things that we do together, right? It's not so much the one preacher in a kind of mass communication form, talking to a lot of people, and you're just sitting there, like prayers, chants, and the whole experience of the ceremony. That is the ritualistic model, because it exploits togetherness and we-ness. So it sees the original, right? The ritual model sees the original or highest manifestation of communication not in the transmission of intelligent information, but in the construction and maintenance of an ordered, meaningful cultural world that can serve as a control and container for human action. What happens when we look at a newspaper with the transmission model and then the ritual model? Carey asserts, if one examines a newspaper under a transmission view of communication, one sees the medium as an instrument for disseminating news and knowledge, sometimes divertisement in larger and larger packages over greater distances. Questions arise as to the effects on audiences. News is enlightening or obscuring reality, as changing or hardening attitudes, as breeding credibility or doubt. And then he says this, he says, under a ritual view of communication, a ritual view of communication will focus on a different range of problems in examining the newspaper. It will, for example, view reading a newspaper less as sending or gaining information, and more as attending a mass, a situation in which nothing new is learned, but in which a particular view of the world is portrayed and confirmed. And so, that's a bit long-winded, but look at it this way. Like, when you spend your time surfing Facebook, or even doing Instagram and such, it's not really like new information is being gleaned. It's more that it's kind of structuring and ordering your life and the relationships in your life. Nothing new happens, really. It's kind of a repeat of the same old. How many different kind of lunches can somebody take a selfie of? Under a ritual view, the news is not information, but drama. What is the object of recasting communication into a ritual model? Well, Carey says this. He says, our problem is that we think that the transmission model will solve all our problems, and it doesn't, because we don't need better and better information. What we need is more enjoyable time spent together. What we need is a kind of greater experience of communication we-ness than we do really good information. And what's the rub of this, Carey says? Well, it makes us nuts. It makes us crazy, And so this is it. What is the object of recasting communication into a ritual model? He says, the widespread social interest in communication derives from a derangement, right, or a craziness in our models of communication and community. This derangement derives in turn from an obsessive commitment to a transmission view of communication and the derivative representation of communication in complementary models of power and anxiety, right? So what I take that to mean is, by overemphasizing the transmission model, it creates this great emotional distress. Thinking you need more and better information rather than a kind of more meaningful, enjoyable, communal experience together. That's the problem. So he concludes, he says, the object then of recasting our studies of communication in terms of a ritual model is to give us a way in which to rebuild a model of and for communication of some restorative value in reshaping our common culture. And again, what I think this to mean is that what we need are enjoyable rituals of meaning, where we can exploit the time together